Hello, and welcome to another episode of Teaching with Inquiry Live. I am back again after a break for Thanksgiving, so I hope you had a chance to spend last Monday night enjoying some of the time with your family and friends and getting a little bit of an extra time off. So tonight we're going to continue our theme for October, which is talking about small group instruction, and in particular today I want to share with you why I have decided to use guided math groups in my room this year. And I also want to walk you through kind of my thinking process as to why I am using guided math this year, what are my reasonings, and kind of how I have come to approach guided math so far this year in my classroom. So thank you so much for joining me. If you are new to the live show, my name is Patty and I am a junior grade teacher here in Ontario, Canada. And I am also the teacher blogger behind madlylearning.com. And I happen to have two very clicky dogs at my feet at the moment. So if you hear some clicking dogs at the background, that is just my impatient puppies trying to find a comfortable spot to lie down, even though one of those puppies actually is my parents' dog that's visiting us for a while. So guided math groups. So here's some reasons why I've decided that number one, whole group instruction is probably not going to work for me this year, and that I am going to need to change things up. So number one is I have even though I'm teaching a straight grade for the first time in what seems like forever, I actually have much bigger of a split in terms of abilities this year than I think I've ever had in any of my straight grades. So regardless of the fact that there is one grade assigned to me in the classroom, the range of needs within my room is so widespread that if I teach a whole group lesson, I'm not even having a hope that I'm going to hit 75% of my class. So I needed to do something a little bit different there. Number one, I am busy. I am down teaching a 0.6 this year, so I have even less time in the classroom. And I have 3 kids involved in competitive sports, so my time is pinched. So I need to have something where I am doing much more assessment in the moment instead of the take-home assessments that I'm ending up at the end of my day gathering and putting in my teaching bag and then taking home with me. So I find that small group instruction does allow me to do far more in the moment assessment instead of a lot of take-home assessment. So that is another reason why small group instruction is going to be my go-to, especially for math this year. Number 3, I was actually noticing at the beginning of my year that my students' confidence and their risk-taking behaviors in math was not that great. So I actually asked them, how do they feel about themselves as math students? And I found from that quick survey question that my students didn't have a lot of confidence in their abilities in math. And perhaps this was in part by the idea that here I am doing a whole group lesson and I've got my kids that are ready for extensions in math. They're zooming up, their hands are up all the time, they're answering questions, making it seem really easy. Well, the remainder of my class is feeling lost and left behind, and then they're feeling defeated because they don't know the answers as quickly as, say, some of my students who are really have great, strong abilities in mathematics. So I knew I needed to do something where I could boost the confidence of my slow to get it learners, the ones that get it but don't really get it right away. They take a little bit more time. And some of my students that just need to kind of work through it and they'll be fine. I needed to make sure that I could spend some targeted time with them so that they might not actually be learning math at the same pace as some of my more advanced students, and allowed the ability for those advanced students to really extend their learning. And number 4, the fact that I always had the same couple of students raising their hands, it was limiting the participation of others, and it was making them feel defeated, like I had mentioned. So this really kind of led me to the idea that I am not going to be the best able to serve the needs of my students if I'm teaching whole group lessons. So I'm going to have to do much more guided instruction where I'm teaching different versions of the same lesson multiple times, giving students kind of what they need in the moment. And fifth is I am starting my, what I like to call it, spiraling version 2. I tried a bit more spiraling last year, and some of the things that I had tried, if I'm completely honest, they work, but it just didn't feel authentically me. So I need to tweak and change and make it a little bit more my own so that it fits my own personal teaching style, as well as the dynamics that actually happen within my classroom. So I've changed some of those things up. So I needed to make sure that I had that guided math piece in there so that I could include spiraled instruction where we're looking at kind of small tasks each week and building different tasks from different strands over a longer period of time and kind of grouping different strategies together. And then how I've changed it up this year is I'm having much smaller projects, but I'll have projects as culminating activities that kind of encompass a lot of different strands together. So I did do that last year, but I had very large projects and they were almost a little too overwhelming. So I've decided that I need to make small, manageable projects for my students that encompass a variety of tasks that we will work through beforehand before we get to the project. And I'll actually talk a little bit more about that. So that's my reasoning why. So these are the reasons why I'm doing more guided instruction and what has prompted me to kind of set off on what feels like a much different journey for me because I'm very much used to doing a bit more whole group instruction, even when I had a split grade. But this year, that's probably not going to happen. I mean, I tried it in September and it was working for a little bit, but I really felt, when you feel that feeling kind of in the back of your head and you hear that little voice going like, this just isn't working. You've got to try something different. So this is what I'm trying. And who knows if I'm still going to be doing it come term 2, but this is kind of my journey and my process. And perhaps you might be feeling the same way as me and you're looking for maybe a different or alternative approach that you can mix in and make it with your own. Now, I don't have anything prepared. I'm just working like a regular teacher where I'm coming up with lessons that I think will suit my own teacher. I mean, I know that I sell things on TPT, but this isn't happened to be one of them. So I want to walk you through kind of how I have planned and put my thinking together so that you can kind of come along with this journey. And again, it's still kind of in these stages, but I wanted to share kind of how I go through some of that with you. It all started with spiraling. So I'm going to share my screen with you here. Let's see if I don't know if my face pops up there. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Okay, so this was my iPad, and this was kind of how I started planning out my math. So I looked around for some scope and sequences that a variety of different school boards and the province had put together on how they wanted teachers to approach some spiraled instruction. Now, I'll be completely honest, some of the ways that they fit them together just didn't make sense when it came down to my experience with teaching math to students. And I really was looking for a project task that could be used as a culminating activity. It was definitely something that my students loved doing and they wanted more of. So we did 2 major projects last year, which was planning out a soccer tournament, which was term 1's project, and term 2's project was a big dinner party that we had for all of the families at the end of the year where we brought in food, we planned all the money. My students loved those projects and they wanted more of them. So instead of doing these big full term projects, I decided to do mini ones. So that really was what guided my thinking. So using all of these resources together, this is kind of what I came up with. So definitely at the beginning, I was doing some whole group instruction primarily because, well, if I'm completely honest, I have to get students to get used to this data management. So I looked at the Get to Know You math. So I have the data management here, and so data management was here, and then I wanted to do a Get to Know You activity where we had this, where we were just doing survey information with students. So I really wanted to make sure that we had this Get to Know You section at the beginning. And for that, we were looking at data management as well as measurement. So doing things like measuring people's height, measuring their shoe size. We could do some data management, looking at surveys and graphs. Then we moved on to looking at addition and subtraction. Now, I actually decided not to do some of that as it came through, but I was instead looking at we ended up having a different project that I ended up planning for this. Now, I was looking at these weeks that are down here. These things represented the amount of weeks that I was going to, or some amount of days that I was going to spend on each different strand. So how long I was going to spend. And I haven't really done it, but this is kind of how I was grouping things together and brainstorming for term 1. And then I started planning out the different tasks that we could do and how I could group different activities. So you'll see that for data management, we did an all about us project, and then which was very, very simple. It wasn't very advanced. And then we did this, we're planning on right now on doing this shopping and Halloween party next week for my students. So definitely for this kind of way, it was a little bit of looking at kind of how other people had grouped together their expectations, and then looking at what was happening every month or two and seeing if there was a theme or a project that I could put together. So for Halloween party, it's actually going to be any kind of party just to be more inclusive. But students will use concepts of money and decimals, addition and subtraction, as well as looking at different things of measurement to be able to plan out the costing of a party that they could throw in the classroom. So I will give them a budget and they will have to plan a party using clippings and coupons to make sure that they have all of the things that they might need for a party, including decorations and as well as food. So a very simple classroom party that they could plan. And they'll do that next week. And then moving on, I have other projects that are planned, such as creating packaging for a Christmas or holiday present for somebody else. And then moving on to some of the other projects that I want to be doing are looking at mapping and see what else I had if I'm looking at some other planning of 3D figures and how I'm going to do that. So I'll actually end up covering something from every strand by the end of the term. And then I have again for looking at term 2, what that's going to look like. So I did plan out some calendars of what I wanted to focus on. And then I did color code that as well with the different strands of the math to make sure, just because I'm visual like that, I wanted to see which strands of math were going to be covered for different things. So operational sense right now with operations with decimals to the hundredths, as well as numbers up to 10,000. Sorry, 100,000 actually. Once we're done that, we'll move on to shapes and algebra, perimeter and area, as well as some more data management to think about the packages that they could create to fit a toy if they were going to mail it in the mail to a friend. So looking at some more December location and movement, as well as when we're moving into January, 3D figures, mass and volume. And then I was brainstorming here what my math centers were actually going to look like. So what was the plan? Now, this isn't actually what it looks like now, because that's when I had whole group instruction. So I started with a 10-minute warm-up, which I use my differentiated daily math pages for students to review some knowledge and understanding components of learning. And I still definitely do that. But then I had a 20-minute math lesson followed by centers. But I found that whole group lesson wasn't working. So I've since scrapped that, and I still start with my math warm-up differentiated math pages, but then I move on to simply centers activities. And this has helped me to be able to meet with groups, and I get much more assessment data in the moment because they're doing stuff right in front of me, and I can see where they're struggling. I can give some corrections. So I do a quick 5 or 10 minute lesson, and I show them what I want them to do. We do something together, and then I have them practicing, and then I'm working with them one-on-one or two-on-one in a small group to have them go through that. And then they have 4 math centers as they are continuing to move on. So my math centers, I don't know if I have a slide for that. This one, it's really rough, y'all. It's rough. Okay. So these are my 4 math centers. Again, I'm sharing my brainstorming pages with you. This is the nitty gritty. It's not always pretty. And my printing is absolutely beautiful. I know. Definitely not chart paper printing. That is for sure. But I do have 4 centers. So my students are working on independent learning centers so that I can be working with these small groups. So I plan out activities that my students can do independently. And I fit them into 4 categories. The first, and I always use the math acronym that's very popular out there, but I have the math, which is math on your own. And for this one, I'm giving students some knowledge and understanding questions. These are like for this week, it's simply just answering money addition questions to the decimal place where they've got to the 100th decimal place. So they've got money questions that they have to add and subtract. And that's what they're working on simply just for the M this week. And then for the A, I wanted it to be an application. So this is where I have problem solving questions where I want students to be able to apply the things that they learn into solving these problems. Now, the first couple of times I did this, I limited them to how many things they could do. So if I wanted them to do 8 questions, I gave them 8 questions. If I wanted them to do 3-word problems, they did 3-word problems. But the problem with that is I always try to ask my students for feedback. And they very clearly said, wait a minute, you give us a lot of choice in language and we really like it. So they have choice boards for spelling and they have choice boards for writing and choice boards for reading responses. But in math, I was giving them centers activities and they had no choice. And they asked for it and they really advocated for themselves to say, you know what, maybe could we have something like we have for spelling for math? So you give us 9 problems and we pick the 3 that we want to complete. And I said, okay. And then I had a few that said, I don't want to pick. Can you just pick for me? So now I have a 9 problem choice board for this week that my students have requested. And I have highlighted 3 of those 9 questions in gray for those students that just want me to pick for them. So some students have choice and other students can choose to not have a choice, if that really makes sense. But that's what they've asked for. So I was able to do that. I really do think it's important to really listen to your students' feedback and embed those choices into the classroom. When they see automatically that they got a choice this week, they were so excited today when I introduced that because they felt heard and listened to, and is going to definitely bring me more engagement in my learning. So we also have for my T Math Center, that is time with teacher. So I still have students rotating into that center. So my students do not rotate by my math groups in these centers. They rotate by table group between these centers. And sometimes I'm really not too strict on which center they do when, but it helps them to structure and plan. So whenever they're on the T center, it's really just catch up time unless they're with me at the table. So I will pull students in very much flexible groupings, or what appears to be flexible groupings, even though they're for me. So they rotate through the centers in one way, and then I pull them into my table differently. So they're not rotating with the same people. And the reason for that is because I'm grouping my students by ability and by math skill, I don't actually want them rotating through the centers by math skill. I want the rotation of those math centers to be with students that have a variety of levels so that they can work together and help one another out, and they can help and teach one another too. So the way they're rotating through the math centers is homogeneous, and I always get those two mixed up. Anyways, it doesn't matter. The way they're rotating through those groups is going to be mixed ability groups And when they come and see me at the guided reading table, those are going to be by ability groups. So it's a bit more of a complex way to group your students, but it just kind of works for me and my guys. And finally, the last center is a hands-on learning. And I will flip back and forth between what kind of activities I'm doing here. Sometimes I will do a STEM math activity. Sometimes I will do a tech activity. And other times I will actually do a little tech assessment. So sometimes I have used things like Boom cards, which if you haven't heard of Boom cards, I suggest you Google Boom Learning and see their little flashcards that allows you to track a student's progress, except the flashcards are customizable, which is really kind of cool. And so I can track that. So sometimes I will have Boom cards. Sometimes I will just make a quiz on Google Forms and have them complete that. And other times I will have them simply just doing something fun and engaging with manipulatives on the carpet. So there's a lot of kind of things that are happening there, but definitely the H is the fun one, and the knowledge and understanding is just your basic application, and your apply is your problem solving, and T is time with me. So that is kind of what I've done. Now, when I'm grouping my students, as I said, I group them by ability. So I use a stoplight for my own thinking of how I group them. And I did use also their own survey data with where they described them. So I showed them a modified stoplight: green, yellow, orange, and red. And we described what it felt like to be a green student, where you're always on the go. And you're go, 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 go. You're always ready for a new challenge. Math comes really easy to you. And that's okay. And whether or not you're feeling green. And we didn't talk about it kind of in all math, but definitely talked about it in different concepts and how they feel about math. Then we talked about the yellow. And yellow is sometimes there's caution, but we're still moving. Orange being like, well, we're kind of stopped at the beginning. We're not really sure where to go, but eventually we might be just slow to get started. Slow to learn the concept. It might take us a little bit more practice time than what we feel like it should, but we do eventually get it. These are typically the three groups that I have in my room of kids that are working at grade level. So I have those that often will need extensions or pick up the math really, really quickly. I have those that just kind of work at a moderate pace as to be expected. And then I have others that just take a little bit longer and more practice to gain confidence in being able to do it, but they're able to complete grade level activities. And then I have other students who are on modified programs that need a lot of remedial help, and they're in my red group. And even though some of my students have identified that with certain concepts, they're definitely feeling red. They stop, they give up before they even try. So that is, and then I plan out my guided groups. I do the same learning goals for the week, and I plan modified activities. So for this week, we're looking at adding and subtracting decimal numbers to the hundredth and money amounts. And for my red group, I will be using adding and subtracting of 2 and 3 digit whole numbers with manipulatives. And for my orange group, we'll be using manipulatives to model money amounts and having them added and subtracted, perhaps with its actually like role playing through that, so that there's kind of a story and a narrative behind that. I find that helps with a lot to get concepts. With my yellow group, we'll be reviewing some of the addition strategies and moving in towards some student generated algorithms, as well as perhaps approaching the standard algorithm if we're ready, and looking at how we can use that to apply adding and subtracting decimals. With my yellow group, we'll be definitely looking more at the standard algorithm partial product as strategies to be used when adding and subtracting decimals. And for my advanced group, we're going to be looking at solving some complex problems, multi-step problems with addition and subtraction of decimals using the standard algorithm and how they can apply that. So there's going to be some extension in there for those students as well. So same concept, but just at 4 different levels, and getting students to work on that. So some of the things that I have learned from doing this, because remember, I'm still on my journey. I definitely have not mastered this. Things are constantly changing as I get new feedback and new information from my students, but this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. Number one, I'm much happier with the way I have decided to spiral this year. I loved the projects, but they were too big. And I ended up doing a lot more work because of that. So I wanted smaller projects that were more manageable for students to do in a shorter amount of time. And I'm finding that my spiraling methods this year, I'm much happier with the maintenance of it and the workload of that for myself. And my students are really excited and engaged with the idea of the projects as they're coming. It's something that they really look forward to, much different than a test. But those projects will definitely be my final assessments for those skills. I think it's next second thing I have learned from this process is asking your students for feedback is a really valuable way to get ideas about what's going to work best in your classroom. I maybe wouldn't have thought of always giving choice boards to my students, but I found it's really helpful and they really like it. So why not give that option? I do it already in language. They're used to that concept. So why not take something I'm doing in another subject and applying it to this one? I also have noticed the significant drop in my at-home marking because I am doing so much assessment as the students are working with me, and I can check things off. I know what things I'm looking for when they're coming to me. And because I know what I'm looking for, I can quickly do did they get it? Did they not get it? Where do they need to go next? I can make a lot of notes while they're working with me so that I'm not taking it home. And actually, the quality of the data that I'm gathering is so much better than being able to look at a worksheet and deciding, okay, yeah, they did well. They got an A or they got a B. I can actually pinpoint and target the skills that I need to teach and reteach and where they need to go next. And who doesn't like less marking at home? I would prefer no marking at home, but that's not always the reality. But it's definitely reduced it by using more guided groups in math. My students really like the independent tasks, in part, I think, because they've helped design them. Then they're far more engaged. They've asked for different activities of things that they could do. They remember things from last year that they wanted to try. And because they are choosing it, they're far more engaged. Now, I will say my students have a fairly decent independent learning skills, but independent work doesn't mean silent. And this is something that I've really had to kind of come away with, that it's not just because my kids aren't silent when they work, doesn't mean they can't work independently. So when I frame the idea of can my students work independently, they can work independently enough that they can get some stuff done. It's very rarely silent with no talking. But to help combat that, sometimes I do play a little bit of music, so that will often bring down some of the talking in my room anyways. And number 5, one of the things that I think I need to do next is look at a recording page that allows me to actually look at their center's work in a quick and efficient way. So right now I kind of take them and look at what they've been doing as they come to me for guided reading. But I think if I had kind of like a quick place for them to write answers, I could look at them and it would be a much more consolidated place to have them answer work or have them use exit cards. But I definitely want to have a product that I can collect and mark really quickly and have physical evidence of their learning more than just my observations and my conversations with them. I do need to have, that's my next step, is figuring out what is going to be the most efficient system to have a consolidated quick check of what students can do and what products they can do. So I'm going to play around with that idea, but that's definitely my next step in this journey of using more math centers in my classroom. So I hope I've given you some food for thought for tonight, sharing with you kind of my journey as I've been going through these math centers and how I've been thinking through it and what my process has been. I hope it's given you a few ideas that you yourself can tweak to your own programming and how you can pull different ideas for your own math centers. I would love to continue on this conversation. I will probably end up doing more videos as the year goes on, sharing with you other reflections and how this might have changed and developed throughout this year. So I hope that that is something that you might be interested too. So thank you so much for watching. Don't forget that you can find this video and on YouTube at the end of the week. It is reposted on YouTube, and it's also rebroadcast as a podcast. So if you listen to podcasts on your drive to work, why not subscribe to the Teaching with Inquiry podcast on your podcast player? So Apple iTunes, or I'm not sure what's on Android. But if you subscribe, you can get all of these videos and listen to these ideas on your drive to work in the morning, as well as all of the other past shows are on there as well. So thanks so much for joining me. If you've got any questions about math, feel free to drop them in the comments below, and we will chat next week as we are going to be talking a little bit more in depth about what specifically guided reading looks like in your classroom. Yeah, guided reading. That's what we're talking about next week. So I'm going to share with you what guided reading looks like in my room. Thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you next week. Bye for now.